Welcome to Cerebral Book Chat, everyone. And it's been a little bit of a while since I've done some, and also I think I'm going to make this a bit more of a unique one because those of you may or may not know it is the anniversary of Queen Elizabeth, Elizabeth Regina II's death. She died in 2022 on September 8th at Balmoral Castle, which was one of her favorite places to be. She was 96. She was actually very strong and well up to her 90s, but in her last year, she started not feeling so well. We did celebrate her platinum anniversary. She was 70 years on the throne, which is a remarkable achievement for someone who wasn't even supposed to be queen. That's the extraordinary thing in a way, because the way the monarchy has been set up in England is there aren't really meant to be queens that rule. And yet she made such an enormous change for everyone's life. So that's why I want to celebrate and honor her as well, because it was such an unlikely kind of circumstances that led her to be queen in the first place. So this is the book, Queen Elizabeth, her life. It's basically about her life, 1926 to 2022. It is kind of a young adult book, but I think it's really well done and well made. And it says on the cover, it will be for us to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place. And I think that's all of us need to be aware of that, because yes, the world is in quite a challenging position. I think most of us would agree, but I'm putting it out there that it will ascend to more wonderful and glorious things in all our lifetimes. So I want to briefly sort of chat about how extraordinary it is that she became queen at all. Her father was never supposed to be king, but again, he became king because he had to be, because his brother abdicated, because he didn't want to be king, even though he was set up to be king for his whole life. So it's kind of like Queen Elizabeth in that he only had, her father, King George, only had daughters. He only had 2 daughters, so he had no male heir. And back then, the male heir was the only one that could really take the throne, unless there were nobody else at all that could do it. And that ended up being the case. Her beloved father wasn't really that well and had some health issues, so he died quite young. I believe he was 56 when he died. And then she had to be queen because she was the eldest daughter. So, and who knew she was going to be queen for 70 years, right? She became queen when she was just in her 20s, I believe, a very young girl. Quite a young girl. And can you imagine having that enormous kind of a burden in a way put on her, but also an amazing honor and duty, and she always saw it that way. And so she was my queen, and she still is my queen. So I wanted to celebrate her life and the things that she brought to me. Of course, I'm Canadian, and if you don't know, Canada loves the monarch at least as much as England. We see ourselves as English. Don't let anybody tell you that we don't. Although there are people nowadays in the government that might want to see that in another way. Those of us who certainly are over 40 or 50 remember the Queen very well and remember all the things that we did when we would celebrate her in years previous. So that's something I wish to say. So I thought maybe I would talk a little bit about what being the Queen meant to her and to all of us, in her life. And read some passages from the book Queen Elizabeth II. So, first of all, I live in Canada. We have a prime minister, and we do have House of Commons, very much like the UK model, as a commonwealth country, like Australia, for example. So we actually do that. So I thought I would read some stuff there for us. In the United Kingdom, the head of the government is called the Prime Minister. As in Canada, we are a constitutional monarchy. And so that means the Queen is still the head of state. She is the head of state, should she be here. I will not be bringing up her son at this point, although technically he is the monarch. You can see how I feel about it. So, it's my channel. Yeah. Unlike the king or queen, who is the head of state, the prime minister is the leader of the political party voted into power by the people in what is called a general election, which hopefully will be happening soon now, as the minority government has kind of been somewhat toppled by the fact that the person propping up the government is no longer doing such. So we'll see what happens. But we're hoping that there will be an election soon. In a general election, people over the age of 18, like me, are asked to vote for a candidate to represent their region or constituency in the House of Commons. The United Kingdom, for example, is divided into 650 constituencies. Each constituency is allowed one seat in the House of Commons, very much like Canada, I would say. The Prime Minister is normally the leader of the party whose candidates win the most seats in the House of Commons, again like Canada. Once a political party wins the House, the leader is invited to see the king or queen, who asks them to form a government in his or her name. And that does still happen, although I believe it might be, there might be the royal person. What is the name of that person? It's been so long since I've talked about it now. Governor General. It might be the Governor General, in fact, that they talk to. But I know the Queen used to talk to the head of state in Canada quite often. She would talk to the prime ministers quite often. To form a government, the prime minister chooses around 20 members of his or her party to make up a group of ministers called the cabinet. The prime minister and the cabinet are in charge of making most of the important decisions in the government. Each member of the cabinet is responsible for a specific government department, such as education, health, transport, and foreign affairs. And that's true even now, as we hopefully will have our own election. That is what will be happening now. Again, how does one get an audience with the Queen? That would be an interesting thing to think about. Because, of course, an audience with the Queen is a very honorable and regal thing, for sure. Now, of course, she did speak with the Prime Minister very much. And if you watch the amazing movie with, because, of course, I am a Winston Churchill person. I mean, many, many people in Canada, of course, are a Winston Churchill person. And his actual monarch was her father, King George. And so he would often meet, because it was during the war at this time, the Second World War. So that is what happened. Then when she became queen, people would have an audience with her. So let's read about that. An audience with the Queen. Even though the Queen is a constitutional monarch and not allowed to make laws, she is still an important part of the government. After general election, the leader of the winning party is invited to Buckingham Palace for an audience with the Queen. During this meeting, the Queen asks the potential Prime Minister whether he or she will form a government in her name. The answer is usually yes, although it doesn't have to be, right? And that actually does happen in Canada, or I believe it did, or representative of the Queen. Yeah. After the initial audience, the Prime Minister is invited to visit the Queen once a week in her audience room. She has an audience room. During the audience, the Prime Minister and the Queen can talk about anything they like in the strictest of confidence. And while the Queen is not allowed to attempt to change government policy, she is allowed to express her opinion on what is going on, something she must avoid doing publicly. No record is kept of what is discussed. An audience with the Queen usually lasts around 20 minutes, but with audiences with Sir Winston Churchill, the Prime Minister in 1954, could last more than 90 minutes. As well as audiences with the Prime Minister, the Queen regularly has audiences with ambassadors and world leaders. So, for example, our Prime Minister, especially previous ones, as well as people who interest her. Audiences usually take place in the morning, and the Queen hosts some 200 or 300 a year, which, if you think about it, meant she was doing one almost every day. She was very busy. And there is a drawing of Winston Churchill. Did anybody wonder what he looked like? Okay, now the last one I do want to talk about was something that meant ever so much to me. So let's see if I can find it. Well, should we talk about that? Perhaps that would be a good thing. No, I do want to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart. Ever since I was a child, as early as I can remember, we would watch the Christmas broadcast. And it was broadcast to all of the Commonwealth as far as I know. And it was definitely a big part of Christmas in my house. Yeah. I was just going to, maybe we didn't have much else, but we always watched the Christmas broadcast. And it was where the Queen would talk about the year, talk about a little bit about her life and about Christmas, and talk about her hopes for the coming year as we entered in the new year. And it was always such a beautiful thing to see. And she would talk about sometimes about the Commonwealth and all the things that she had done. And it was just such a glorious, honorable thing. And it felt like she was honoring you as her subjects and hoping that you had a happy Christmas and a happy year as well. And it was certainly a tradition, which now we don't do as much, I believe. So I just want to honor her again and say what a wonderful time that was. So, the Christmas broadcast. The very first Christmas broadcast was delivered by Queen Elizabeth's grandfather in 1932, 6 years after she was born. It was transmitted live over wireless radio from Sandringham House to radio sets around Great Britain, as well as India, Australia, Canada, Kenya, and South Africa. Queen Elizabeth's father, King George VI, continued the tradition of the Christmas broadcasts, but they didn't happen every year until the Second World War, when King George used his Christmas message to reassure the people and boost morale. Because as you may or may not know, he had a really big problem speaking at times. If anybody's watched the movie The King's Speech, he did have quite the challenge, but he was very up to the task because he knew that he needed to lead his people. So such a beautiful man, honestly, really. Queen Elizabeth sat at the same desk her father and grandfather used when she made her first Christmas broadcast over the radio in 1952. In this broadcast, Elizabeth pledged to continue her father's work and asked people to wish her luck for her coronation. That was her first year. That was to take place the following year. After her first broadcast, Elizabeth went on to make a broadcast every single year, apart from 1969, where her documentary was entering instead. Elizabeth's first televised Christmas broadcast took place in 1957 and was filmed live. Today, Elizabeth records her broadcasts in advance so that they can be played at a convenient local time. in the countries around the Commonwealth. Elizabeth sees her Christmas message as her chance to address the nation and the Commonwealth of Nations from her heart. In it, she is able to express her views about the events she has seen over the previous year and thank the people for their support and their service. And that's a little bit about our wonderful queen, as we remember her. And as we keep going in this new millennia that we're in 2024, and no good things will be coming for us as we also enter into the school year, which always for me has been the beginning of the year anyway. So happy September, everybody, and God save the Queen.